It began with a scream, sharp, raw, and utterly out of place in the early calm of Haven Ridge Rescue Center. The sun had barely crested the horizon, and most of the animals were still curled in sleep. But in one violent instant, silence shattered. Two volunteers dropped their clipboards and sprinted toward the back kennels, hearts pounding. One of them caught a glimpse through the corridor window, a blur of black and tan muscle, teeth flashing, foam streaking from a snarling mouth. The steel kennel door was no longer a door. It hung limp and twisted on its hinges, torn open from the inside. In the center of the chaos stood him, Max. His chest rose and fell in heavy bursts, ears flattened tight against his skull, every muscle in his broad frame coiled like a spring. His eyes, wild amber, unblinking, darted from face to face, searching not for escape, but for understanding, for something that made sense. The other animals whimpered behind their cages. A cat hissed. Somewhere down the hallway, a dog let out a warning bark, but no one dared move closer. Not yet. Hannah was already there, faster than most. Years as a paramedic had taught her how to respond before panic took over. She stood at a distance, her breath steady, eyes fixed on the trembling German shepherd. She had never seen this dog up close, only heard the stories. He was the one they called unreachable, the one found wandering near a burned-out barn with a half-melted chain still clinging to his neck, the one who growled at every hand, every voice, the one they whispered might need to be put down. "Get the tranquilizer!" someone yelled behind her. Another staffer rushed forward, weapon in hand. Warnings rang out. "Keep back, he's unpredictable." The dart struck Max clean in the flank. His growl twisted into a wounded yelp. He staggered, legs wobbling beneath him, then collapsed heavily onto the floor. His sides heaved, saliva stringing from his jaw. But Hannah didn't flinch. She didn't look at the foam or the broken door or the chaos around her. She looked at his eyes, and what she saw wasn't violence. It was pain, and it was fear. So deep and consuming, it seemed to swallow the room whole. The others were already murmuring about reports, about evaluations, about whether he was worth the risk. But Hannah stood still, heart hammering in her chest, unwilling to look away, because something in Max told her the story wasn't over. Not yet. They told Hannah the story later, after the dart had worn off and Max was lying unconscious in the dim light of the infirmary. He had been found 3 weeks earlier, wandering alone near the scorched remains of a barn on the outskirts of town. His fur was streaked with ash, and a heavy half-melted chain still dragged behind him. The fire had long been extinguished, but its scent still clung to him like a memory that refused to fade. Animal control said he'd bitten the first handler who tried to get close, broke through a temporary gate on the second day, snapped at anyone who reached into his kennel. They had to sedate him just to feed her clean. No one could touch him without thick gloves, metal shields, and a quick hand on the syringe. But Hannah saw something else. That evening, as the rest of the shelter bustled around her, voices low, feet quick, eyes wary, Hannah slipped into the small treatment room where Max lay sedated. The fluorescent light buzzed above her. Max's body was still, but his face held a quiet strain, even in sleep. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knelt beside him with a bowl of warm saline and a cloth, her hands steady as she gently cleaned the raw patches of skin beneath his matted collar. His legs bore deep cuts, some fresh, some old. Along his flanks were burns, reddened and inflamed, like ghosts of a nightmare that hadn't yet ended. He let out a low growl in his sleep, almost a warning, but Hannah didn't flinch. She worked slowly, saying nothing, never reaching too far, never assuming trust. And when she finished tending to the worst of the wounds, she sat back against the wall, watching his chest rise and fall, and simply stayed. That became the rhythm of her days, always when he was sedated, always with quiet hands and quiet presence. She would change his bandages, refill his water, adjust his blankets. Then she'd sit nearby, reading aloud or just humming softly to herself. The staff called it a waste of time. "He's broken," they said. "Too far gone. Some dogs don't come back." But Hannah knew better. She had seen trauma before, its sharp edges, its silence, not just in animals, but in people. In war veterans who flinched at the slam of a door, in accident victims who screamed in their sleep, in children who went mute after loss. Max wasn't dangerous. He was hurt, deeply, quietly. And more than anything, Hannah believed he was afraid. That was the part no one else seemed to see. It was the start of spring break when Lily first came to Haven Ridge. Hannah hadn't planned for it. Her shifts at the shelter were scheduled tight, and the babysitter had canceled last minute. With no better option, she packed Lily's backpack with snacks, coloring books, and her worn-out stuffed dog named Buttons. "Just stay close, okay?" Hannah said gently as they entered the center. Lily nodded, but Hannah already knew her daughter too well. Lily didn't just sit and wait. By the time Hannah was reorganizing a supply cabinet in the back hallway, Lily had already wandered toward the kennels. That's where she saw him. Max. He was curled in the far corner of his cage, his body tense and alert, though his eyes were half-lidded with sedation. His ears twitched at every noise, every flicker of light. He looked like he was waiting for the world to strike again. But Lily didn't flinch. She didn't call out or press her face to the bars like other children might have. She simply stood a few feet away, watching quietly. She tilted her head slightly, just as he did, as if mirroring him. Her mom had once told her that dogs didn't just bark to speak. They used their eyes, their tails, their stillness. And Max was shouting without a sound. Lily didn't walk closer. She did something most adults wouldn't have thought to do. She sat down, cross-legged on the cool cement, far enough to be non-threatening, close enough to be present. She unzipped her lunchbox, pulled out a slice of turkey sandwich, and gently placed it on the ground, just out of reach. Then she turned her body sideways, eyes lowered. No direct eye contact, no challenge, and she waited. At first, Max only growled softly, a low rumble of distrust. But then the growl faded into a short, heavy breath. A huff, not approval, but not rejection either. Only then did Lily whisper, "Hi, you look tired." Max didn't move. He didn't bark or bare his teeth. He just stared at her, long and slow, as if trying to understand why she wasn't afraid. Lily smiled softly and pulled something from her pocket, a crumpled piece of notebook paper, its corners smudged with crayon. On it was a drawing of a big-eared dog, a heart floating above its head. "I made this," she said, pushing it under the gate. "It's for you." Max didn't touch it, but he didn't tear it either. He simply looked. That was enough. Moments later, Hannah found her daughter sitting barely a few feet from the cage. Her heart caught in her throat. "Lily!" she hissed, rushing forward. But Max hadn't moved. He was still lying there, body taut but not aggressive, ears upright, eyes locked on Lily. Not with fear, but with curiosity. It was the first time anyone had seen Max choose to stay still in the presence of another human. Over the next few days, it became a pattern. Each morning, Lily came to the shelter with her mom. Each morning, she drifted to Max's kennel and sat. Sometimes she brought a book, sometimes a small blanket. Always calm, always quiet. She never asked for anything, never reached for the bars. She just talked. She told Max about school, about her favorite animal documentaries, about the time she tried to build a squirrel obstacle course in the backyard. Her voice was soft, sometimes trailing off, but Max never stopped listening. He didn't lunge when she walked past. He didn't growl when she spoke. He simply watched. And slowly, something began to shift. He started sitting closer to the front of the kennel. He leaned in when Lily arrived, sniffing the air like her presence had become familiar. Safe. Hannah watched it all in quiet awe. Her daughter wasn't trying to train Max or tame him. She treated him like a companion from the beginning. She offered space when it was needed, silence when it was important, and presence when it mattered most. Somehow, Lily knew what most adults didn't. Max didn't need control. He didn't need obedience. He needed trust, and Lily gave it, without question, without hesitation. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough. There were no tail wags, no jumping with joy, but it came in the form of silence, peaceful, steady silence. And in that stillness, something fragile began to grow. The fire started in the back storage room, just a faulty wire, a single spark, and then smoke, thick and fast, curling beneath the doors like a silent warning. It was a quiet afternoon. Most of the volunteers were doing paperwork or feeding the animals. Hannah was reorganizing the supply shelf. Lily had just finished reading Max another story, something about a lost fox finding its way home, and was now folding her little blanket neatly beside the kennel gate. Then came the shrill scream of the fire alarm. In an instant, everything turned to chaos. Smoke filled the hallway with terrifying speed. People shouted. Cages were flung open. Animals yelped and bolted down the corridors, guided by panicked hands. Staff ran from room to room, unlocking every kennel as quickly as they could. But by the time Hannah and Lily reached Max, he was still locked inside. "Where's the key?" Hannah gasped, coughing through the haze. "We can't," one volunteer stammered. "He might bite. We don't have time." Max stood frozen in the corner of his cage. He wasn't growling. He wasn't pacing. He was trembling. His ears were flat, his tail tucked, and his body pressed so tightly to the wall, it looked like he was trying to disappear into it. The smoke, the shouting, the heat, it had triggered something old, something buried, a nightmare he'd lived before. And once again, he was being left behind. "No!" Lily cried, tugging at Hannah's sleeve. "Don't leave him. He's scared. He's not bad." Tears streamed down her face, cutting clean lines through the ash that had begun to settle on her cheeks. She repeated it over and over, voice trembling but sharp as glass. "Please, please don't leave him. Someone save him. Please." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the newer staff members, a young man named Owen, stepped forward. He didn't say anything. He just reached into the emergency kit, pulled out a leash, unlocked the kennel, and tossed the leash gently inside. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "It's okay. You're not alone." Max didn't move at first. He stared at the leash, at the open gate, at the smoke swirling beyond. And then, slowly, tentatively, he stepped forward, his ears still pinned, his body still low to the ground. But his legs carried him out of the cage, out into the hallway. Coughing and wheezing, his eyes scanned the chaos, the bodies moving past, the animals barking and panicking. And then he saw her. Lily, kneeling near the hallway entrance, hands clasped tightly over her mouth, eyes wide with worry. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something inside Max shifted. He didn't run. He didn't bark. He didn't freeze. He walked toward her, slow, unsteady steps, like every movement was a decision. One step, then another. Lily tried to rush forward, but Hannah gently caught her shoulders, holding her back. "He's okay," she whispered, her voice shaking. Lily nodded, tears spilling faster now. "I knew he'd come. I knew it." And then Max did the unthinkable. He lay down, right there, in the middle of the smoky hallway, curled his body slightly and let out a deep, trembling breath. His chest rose and fell. His eyes never left Lily's. It was not fear that held him still this time. It was something else. Trust. That night, After the fire had been put out and all the animals accounted for, the shelter staff replayed the moment again and again in hushed voices. Not one person missed what had happened in that hallway. Max hadn't been rescued. He had chosen to walk out because someone called out for him. And for the first time in a long, long while, he hadn't been left behind. After the fire, something in Max shifted. It wasn't immediate. He didn't start wagging his tail or licking hands. He still flinched at sudden sounds. He still retreated to the back of his kennel when unfamiliar voices filled the hallway. But the pacing at night stopped. The growling quieted. He began to sleep near the front of his cage instead of hiding in the corners. And most telling of all, he started waiting. Every morning, just before 9 a.m., Max would sit facing the entrance, ears perked, eyes watching, waiting for a voice, for a familiar footstep, for Lily. She arrived each day with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders and a different story to tell, about a book she was reading or a new trick she was trying to teach the neighbor's turtle. She no longer sat just outside the kennel. Now, under Hannah's careful supervision, she was allowed to sit just inside the open gate, never too close, always respectful, and Max remarkably let her. One morning, Lily arrived cradling something in a small towel. It was Buttons, her favorite plush dog, the one with one ear sewn back on, the fur patchy and faded from years of love. Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Sweetheart, are you sure you want to give him that?" she asked gently. "He might tear it up." Lily just smiled. "That's okay. It's his now." She knelt by the kennel, pushed the towel forward, and slid the toy carefully through the bars. Max stiffened. He didn't lunge, didn't bark. He sniffed once, then again, and nudged it softly with his nose. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then Max picked it up, gently, and carried it to the far corner of the kennel. There he curled his large body around it like it was something fragile, something precious. And his eyes, which once flashed with fury, now only looked tired, vulnerable, trusting. From that day on, the plush toy stayed with Max. Through every feeding, every vet check, every thunderstorm, it became his comfort, a symbol of something no one could quite put into words. Lily began brushing his coat during their quiet afternoons together. Slow, deliberate strokes, never rushing, never reaching too far. She didn't try to fix him, she just stayed beside him, constant, calm. Max would lean into her hand, his eyes fluttering closed like he was remembering something long forgotten. A world where kindness didn't hurt, where softness didn't mean danger. One day, Hannah tried to reach in too. She crouched beside the kennel and slowly extended her hand, palm up. Max turned, stiffened, let out a low, uncertain growl. Not angry, just unsure. Hannah withdrew immediately, murmuring, "Okay, not today." It was clear Max had made his choice. He didn't want everyone. He didn't need everyone. He had chosen Lily, and Lily had never once asked him to be anything more than what he was, a wounded dog trying to find his way back to safety. That was enough for both of them. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the phone rang. Hannah had just finished cleaning Max's kennel, brushing a soft layer of loose fur into her hand, when the shelter manager called her over. "You should take this," she said, holding out the receiver. Her face was unreadable, but her voice carried weight. "It's about Max." On the line was an older man, his voice gravelly with age, slow and weathered with grief. "My name is George Harrison," he said. "I saw a photo of a German Shepherd on your shelter's website. A friend forwarded it to me. His voice caught. "I think he might be my dog." Hannah's breath stilled. "Go on." "His name was Ranger. He was my partner, a retired police canine. Someone broke into my house last year. They didn't just take things. They took him. I looked everywhere. Filed reports, called stations, even put up flyers. Nothing. Not a trace. There was a pause, the kind that trembles between hope and heartbreak. "But I'd know his face anywhere," George said softly. "That's my boy." Hannah's heart sank. Max, Ranger, hadn't been abandoned. He had been stolen, and suddenly everything made sense. The panic, the way he froze at smoke, the haunted look in his eyes, the way he curled around that stuffed toy like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. They arranged for George to visit the next day. He arrived with slow steps, leaning heavily on a cane. In his other hand, he carried a faded photograph, a younger version of himself sitting on a porch beside a proud, strong German shepherd. Both of them were smiling. Max, Ranger, was at the back of his kennel when the old man entered the room. He didn't move. His eyes narrowed, ears lifting just slightly. Cautious, guarded. George didn't rush. With a grunt, he knelt down beside the gate, placing the photo gently on the ground. "You saved my life once," he whispered. "Remember that night in the snow? I fell on the steps. You barked until the neighbors came. You always knew what mattered." There was silence, a long, aching kind. Then from the pocket of his coat, George pulled out something small, worn leather, weathered edges, and a brass nameplate dulled with time. "You used to wear this," he murmured. "Hated the tags, always chewed them off." Max's eyes darted to the collar. He didn't growl, he didn't retreat, but he didn't move forward either. Instead, a low, soft whimper escaped his throat. Barely a sound, but enough to make Hannah's breath hitch. George smiled, blinking back tears. "You were the bravest partner I ever had. I didn't stop looking, you know. Not once. Not for a second." Max's body shifted forward an inch, then tensed again, caught between instinct and memory. He sniffed the air, ears twitching. The scent was familiar. The voice was familiar. But the world he had lived in since that night, the fire, the chains, the fear, was not. From across the room, Lily watched. She stood near the door, clutching her plush toy so tightly her knuckles turned white. And George saw her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to take anything back. He just looked at Max and said gently, "You don't have to come home, boy. Not if you've already found where you belong." Max blinked slowly, and though he didn't step forward, he didn't step away either. He simply sat, torn between the life that had been and the one he was beginning to believe in. Saturday came with gray skies and a stillness that felt just a little too heavy. Hannah assumed Lily had gone to the library like she said. It was a routine. Her daughter would spend a few quiet hours flipping through animal encyclopedias or sketching in her notebook. But by noon, Lily hadn't come home, and her phone went straight to voicemail. Hannah tried not to panic. At first, she called the library. They hadn't seen her. She called Lily's friend's house. No answer. Then she called again, over and over, until her voice started to crack. By 1:30, Hannah was driving to every corner of town, windows down, calling her daughter's name into the wind. Her hands trembled around the steering wheel. Her voice, when she called the police, was barely coherent. 8 years old, she whispered. Curly brown hair, red hoodie. She said she'd be at the library, but she's not there. She's not anywhere. Back at the shelter, Max already knew. That morning, he had begun pacing in his kennel the moment the doors opened. He hadn't touched his food, hadn't sat down. Every footstep in the hallway made his ears flick toward the entrance, but none of them were hers. By mid-afternoon, Hannah stumbled back into Haven Ridge, clutching her phone like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes were red, her voice was gone. It was the shelter director, an older woman named Marie, who caught her by the shoulders. "Hannah, listen," she said gently. "Do you remember what Mr. Harrison said yesterday about Max?" Hannah blinked, barely hearing. "He said Max used to track, that he found people." Marie gestured toward the front entrance where Max was now standing, his body rigid, tail still, chest heaving. "He knows something's wrong," Marie said quietly. Let him try. Hannah didn't think. She didn't question. She just grabbed the leash, clipped it on, and whispered through shaking lips, "Help me find her." Max didn't hesitate. The moment the door opened, he surged forward, nose to the wind, legs moving with urgency. Hannah ran behind him, heart pounding with something between dread and hope. They wound through back streets and alleys, across empty lots and old fences. Max paused only briefly, sniffing the air, recalibrating, then moving again, driven by a force no human could understand. He didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't doubt. People stepped aside as the German Shepherd moved with laser focus, his body low, his movements deliberate. He turned left at the post office, right near the bakery, then slowed when they reached a small, overgrown alley behind an old bookstore. Max stopped, his ears pinned back. He sniffed hard, barked once, sharp, urgent, then clawed at a small iron gate tucked between two buildings. Hannah's stomach dropped. She rushed forward, yanked the gate open, and found her, Lily, curled behind a broken overhang, knees scraped, hoodie torn, face streaked with dust. Her lips were split, her hands trembled, but she was breathing. "Lily!" Hannah cried, falling to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms. "Oh my God! Oh baby, you're okay! You're okay!" Max didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply walked up beside them, lowered himself gently onto the concrete, and pressed his head into Lily's shoulder. Lily clutched his fur, her small fingers twisting tightly as she sobbed, not from pain, but from relief. She didn't speak, and neither did Hannah. They didn't need to, because Max had found her, and he hadn't stopped until he did. For a long moment, the world felt small again. Just one girl, one dog, and the bond that had saved them both. But soon that quiet moment began to ripple. First it was whispers around the shelter, then it was on the local news. Rescue dog finds missing girl. Photos were posted, reporters called, neighbors stopped by with flowers, cards, home-baked treats. Children pressed their faces to the glass outside Max's kennel, hoping to see the hero dog. But Max didn't care about attention. He didn't understand headlines or applause. He only understood one thing: Lily. Every morning, he waited by the door, ears twitching at the sound of her footsteps. Every afternoon when she walked through the gates with her backpack bouncing and her messy ponytail swinging behind her, Max's eyes softened. He followed her everywhere, not demanding, not intrusive, just present, just steady, just there. Hannah watched them quietly from the sidelines. There was something sacred in the way they moved together, like a rhythm only they could hear. The meeting room at Haven Ridge was unusually full that morning. Staff, volunteers, even a few community members had gathered, drawn in by what Max had done. The story had taken on a life of its own. Emails poured in, adoption requests stacked high on the director's desk, families from other towns, retired officers who had once worked with K-9 units, people who saw Max not as a liability, but as a hero. But Hannah knew what none of them could. They hadn't seen the way he froze when thunder rolled overhead. They hadn't noticed the way his body curled tighter when an unfamiliar voice passed too close. They hadn't watched him follow Lily from room to room, not for food or praise, but for comfort, for connection. So when Hannah stood at the front of the room, a single sheet of paper trembling in her hand, her voice cracked before the first word left her mouth. "I know many of you want to give Max a home," she began, eyes scanning the faces in front of her. "And I'm grateful, truly." She looked down at Lily, who sat in the front row, her plush dog, Buttons, clutched tightly in her arms. "But I think," Hannah continued, her voice softer now, "we already know where Max belongs." The room fell silent. Then she knelt beside her daughter, holding out the letter. "If you'll have him," she whispered, "Max is yours." Lily didn't speak at first. Her small hands trembled as she held Buttons tighter, as if needing to be sure it wasn't a dream. Her voice was barely a breath. "Really?" Hannah nodded, already blinking back tears. And in that moment, it was done. Max was no longer a shelter dog, no longer a case, no longer a warning on a clipboard. He was home. That night, Max slept curled at the foot of Lily's bed, his body finally still, his breathing deep and even. He stirred once, as if from habit, but when he saw her curled beneath the covers, safe and close, he let out a sigh so long and content it felt like an ending. Or maybe a beginning. Life didn't change all at once after Max came home. It shifted gently, like the way sunlight moves across a room, slowly stretching into corners that once lived in shadow. Max didn't become a pet in the way people often expect. He didn't chase balls or do tricks on command. He still flinched at sudden noises, still ducked his head when visitors raised their voices, even in laughter. But with Lily, he was different. He slept at the foot of her bed every night, curled like a guardian in quiet vigil. At the first rustle of her blankets, he'd lift his head, ears twitching, waiting to see if she needed him. Each afternoon, he waited at the school gate, tail still, posture alert, scanning every child until he saw her. And when he did, his body relaxed, just slightly, just enough. In the backyard, Lily would lie on a blanket and read aloud. Max would settle beside her, head on his paws, eyes half closed, letting the words wash over him. Sometimes she whispered secrets into his fur. Other times she simply sat in silence, needing nothing but his nearness. They didn't talk much, not in ways others might understand. But there was a rhythm between them, a quiet conversation that required no words. Lily changed over the years. She grew taller, quieter, more thoughtful. At school, she wasn't the loudest or the most outgoing, but she was the one people turned to when things fell apart. When someone cried in the hallway, when a friend sat alone at lunch, it was always Lily who noticed first. Her teachers called it empathy, but Lily knew better. It wasn't something she learned. It was something Max had taught her, to listen with more than ears, to stay when things got uncomfortable, to be present even in silence, especially in silence. Max passed away on a quiet morning as the first light of spring poured through the bedroom window. He lay on his favorite rug, head resting gently between his paws, the golden light of morning spilling over him like a blanket, gentle, warm, final. His breaths had been slower for weeks, shallower, more labored. But that morning, they simply stopped. No fear, no struggle, just stillness. Lily, now grown, sat beside him. Her hand rested gently on his back, steady and calm. "You saved me," she whispered. "I'll never forget." And she didn't. The years passed, but the lessons stayed. Not when she left for college with a photo of them tucked into her journal. Not when she changed majors halfway through her first year to study animal behavior. And not when she began working at shelters herself, sitting beside trembling dogs who wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't trust. She never rushed them. She never tried to fix them. She understood them. Sometimes in those quiet moments, she would hum under her breath, soft and steady, the same tune she once sang beside Max's kennel all those years ago. And slowly, gently, the dogs would inch closer, because she knew something they didn't yet know. That love didn't need to be loud to be powerful. That healing rarely comes in a flash. It comes in presence, in patience, in the willingness to stay. Years later, another dog would find its way into her life, frightened, uncertain, guarded like Max once was. She welcomed it with the same quiet strength. But no dog ever replaced him, because love like Max's doesn't disappear. It lingers, in memory, in motion. In the silent space where healing begins, it lives on.